It's the early morning of February 22, 2024, and you reach for your phone. Where the signal bar should be, there's one word: SOS. That's the mode a phone drops into when it has no network at all, when the only thing it can still try is an emergency call carried by somebody else's towers. AT&T customers across the country were staring at that same word at the same time, and most of them had no idea what it meant. Some of them were about to find out the hard way. Because here's what SOS mode looked like when it mattered. The FCC counted more than 25,000 calls to 911 that morning that never reached a dispatcher. Sit with what one of those calls is. Someone dials 3 digits in the worst moment of their day, and the line just dies. The entire phone network exists to guarantee that one specific call goes through, and it failed over 25,000 times before lunch. And those 911 calls were the sharpest edge of something much bigger. When the FCC investigated, it put numbers on the whole event, and they're hard to hold in your head. AT&T Mobility had roughly 125 million devices registered on its network, and the outage knocked all of them off. About 92 million voice calls were blocked while the network was down. Every one of those numbers came from a single morning. Now look at the map of it. The FCC found the outage touched all 50 states, plus DC, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands at the same time. A storm can't do that, a cut fiber line can't do that, and neither can a down tower or a regional power failure. Only something at the very center of the network can fail everywhere at once, which tells you exactly where to start looking. So, what actually broke? Deep inside AT&T's network, during a planned expansion, someone installed a new network element with a bad configuration. The FCC's outage report is blunt about this part. The work itself was routine, the kind of change that happens on big carrier networks constantly. Which means the story starts smaller than you'd expect, with ordinary maintenance done by people who thought they were doing their jobs. Here's how a change like this is supposed to move through a network. You plan it, a second set of eyes reviews it, then you install it and watch how the network responds. AT&T's own procedures required the peer review step, and according to the FCC, on this particular change, it simply didn't happen. So a misconfigured element went live with nobody double-checking the config, and the network began reacting to it in ways no one had predicted. I want you to see this in the FCC's own words, because federal reports are rarely this specific. This is DOC 4044150A1, the Commission's report on the February 22, 2024 outage. It finds the network element was improperly configured and that the change skipped the peer review AT&T's own process required. That one missing review is the hinge of the whole story, because every consequence you've seen so far traces back through it. While all of this was unfolding, most people's first guess was an attack, and AT&T knew it. So the same day, February 22, the company published a statement ruling out a cyber attack, saying the outage came from an incorrect process applied while expanding its network. Read that carefully. They admitted on day one that they did this to themselves. That admission matters because it points the fix inward at the checks a company runs on its own work rather than defenses against outsiders. So the change goes live in the early morning hours of February 22, 2024, and one network element starts misbehaving. Here's where it gets strange. The rest of AT&T's network did exactly what it was designed to do. Healthy elements saw errors coming from a bad neighbor and pulled back to protect themselves. But every pullback looked like a fresh failure to the elements next door, so they pulled back too. The safety reflex built to contain a problem became the thing carrying it outward. That reflex doesn't respect state lines. Within hours, the cascade reached all 50 states, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands. AT&T Mobility runs as one nationwide system, which meant there was no unaffected region to lean on and no border where the failure stopped. One element in one place, and the whole map went dark at once. Add up what was on the other end of those connections and you get the scale. 125 million devices dropped off the network, phones stuck on SOS, medical alert systems going quiet, fleet trackers blinking out, all before most of the country was awake. And here's the detail to hold on to. Every one of those 125 million devices remembered it got kicked off. That memory is going to matter in a few minutes. And this framing comes straight from the regulator, so it carries weight. The FCC's own investigation describes the failure spreading through cascading protective responses, the network's defenses reacting to each other instead of to the actual problem. Read that carefully. The safeguards did their individual jobs, and doing those jobs is what spread the outage. So the real question stops being why one box failed and becomes why nothing stood between that one box and every 911 center in the country. So the engineers found the bad element and rolled it back, and here's the twist almost nobody covered: the calls kept failing. The bug was gone, but now 125 million devices, every phone, watch, tablet, and hotspot on AT&T's network, tried to re-register at the same moment, like a whole stadium pushing through one turnstile. The network had survived the mistake and was now choking on its own recovery. That matters, because it means the second half of this outage had a completely different cause than the first. The FCC's report on the outage gives this a name: registration congestion. When your phone reconnects, it has to authenticate with the core network, and that handshake gets expensive when 125 million devices attempt it at once. From the inside, a recovery at that scale looks a lot like a flood attack. So AT&T had to pace its own customers' reconnections to keep the core from tipping over a second time, which is why service came back in waves through the morning of February 22, 2024, instead of all at once. Put the day on a clock, and the story flips. First failures hit at 2:45 in the morning, and the broken network element was corrected roughly 2 hours in. Yet full restoration took about 12 hours, and the FCC counted every one of them. Do the math on that gap. Something like 10 of the 12 hours were spent recovering from the fix, not making it. The outage most customers lived through was the registration storm, and hardly anyone reported that part. By that evening, AT&T's network update page had shrunk the whole day into one calm sentence: wireless service restored to all affected customers. Read it against the clock we just built and you can feel what it skips: 12 hours where the recovery itself was the emergency. Here's why I'm lingering on this. Registration storms are a known failure mode, and the defenses against them were knowable before February 22, 2024. Those missing safeguards are the payoff I owe you, and they're next. So, who got fired for this? That's the question everyone asks after an outage, and the FCC's July 2024 findings quietly refuse to answer it. Instead of naming a villain, the report names 3 broken controls: deficient change management, inadequate peer review, and insufficient lab testing. Notice the shape of that finding, because any one of those controls working properly would have stopped the change before it touched 125 million devices. All 3 had to fail on the same morning, which tells you the safeguards were weak long before anyone typed anything. And you don't have to take my word for any of this, because the FCC published it. This is the Commission's own summary of the investigation, and it spells out that the change went live without peer review and without adequate lab testing first. Read that closely and you realize the employee did what the process allowed. When a process lets one person push a change to a nationwide network with nobody checking, the process is the failure. And that's exactly what federal investigators concluded. Here's the choice every company faces after something like this, and it decides whether the failure repeats. Blaming the person is cheap: one employee, one config change, done, and nothing about the network is safer the next day. Blaming the system is expensive, because now you have to admit that change management was deficient, that peer review was inadequate, and that lab testing couldn't catch what production would do. The FCC even flagged that the recovery congestion was foreseeable, meaning the reconnection storm we covered earlier was a testable scenario nobody had tested. That's the trade. The person story protects the org chart, and the system story protects the next 911 call. Sit with what that means for a second. Somewhere in a network operations center, a change like this gets proposed every single day, at AT&T and at every carrier you've ever used. The only thing standing between a routine Tuesday and 25,000 blocked 911 calls is whether the boring safeguards actually run: the review, the lab test, the rollback plan. The FCC's report matters because it forced those specific controls into the open, and next I'll show you what AT&T actually committed to change. Time to pay off that opening promise with the actual dates. The change went in at 2:45 in the morning Eastern on February 22, 2024, and AT&T had service back that afternoon, roughly 12 hours after the first phones dropped. Within days, the company apologized, credited affected customers $5, and said new safeguards were already in place. Then on July 22, 2024, the FCC published its report, and that document is where the honest accounting finally landed: more than 25,000 blocked attempts to reach 911, traced to a change that skipped peer review entirely. So what actually got fixed? AT&T told regulators it added new technical controls within the first 48 hours, and the July report spells out what the FCC expects going forward: real peer review before any network change ships, lab testing that mirrors the live network, and guardrails so one bad element can't take everything down with it. None of that is exotic. Every control on that list existed decades ago. What was missing on February 22 was the requirement to apply them at 2:45 on a random morning. Here's what you can do before the next one, because there will be a next one. During the outage, AT&T's own advice was Wi-Fi calling, and that still holds. Turn it on in your phone settings today, not mid-emergency. Know which carriers your household uses, because a family split across 2 networks stays reachable when one goes dark. And sign up for your county's alert system and know where the nearest fire station is, because on February 22, police departments were telling people to find a landline or walk in if 911 wouldn't connect. So here's where the map lands. More than 25,000 calls to 911 got blocked because a checklist step got skipped, and the fix that came out of it was that same checklist, enforced. That's the uncomfortable truth about the systems we live on top of. They're held up by quiet process controls nobody notices until the day one gets skipped. Failure Map does this every evening, one public failure traced down to the system underneath it. If you want to see the next system before its failure makes the news, the evening brief is right here.